Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. I'm honored and pleased to deliver this keynote. Let me share my screen, my slide. I hope you can see this now. In relevance to the central theme of this conference, teaching and learning, I have planned to focus my keynote on the topic qualitative observation, which is a systematic method to research and study teaching and learning. Obviously, qualitative observation or observation is widely used in teaching, learning, research across the world. However, observation as a research method is a huge body of knowledge, which I can't deliver in a 15 minutes keynote such as this. However, I will try to do justice by highlighting the essence of it in relation and in relevance to the theme teaching and learning that might be beneficial to the participants of this conference. Mahabharata is one of the popular ancient Indian epics in which Master Drona, who is a master teaching archery, Master Drona teaches his students the art of archery, as you see in this picture. He asked his students to focus at a particular tree to aim their target. Directing a particular tree, he's asking his students to focus on a particular target. All the students managed to find their target. Obviously, a bird, a fruit, and so on. While the archery legend Arjuna tells his master Drona that he aims his focus, which is the eye of a bird. And Master Drona was surprised to see the precision of Arjuna's focus, and he appreciated his precision observation ability. Thus, observation in this story, or in true sense, is not to observe everything, but to focus on what is needed to the nature and the purpose of the study. And that is what an important thing to pay attention when we talk about observation research method. All right, what is observation research method or observation method of research? It is obviously a qualitative research technique. There are people who are also using this in a quantitative manner, but predominantly it's a qualitative research technique that researchers observe participants' ongoing behavior in a natural setting. So they go to the field to observe the event, the people, the phenomenon that they like to observe. It is otherwise known as field research or a naturalistic inquiry happening in a real life situation. Observation method helps researchers to capture the data on what participants do as opposed to what they say about what they do or did. Therefore, if you want to know what people do, you should observe them. Unlike the case of interview as a method, where you want to know what people think and believe. It's what they say to you. But in observation, you observe what people do. So that's the big distinction between observation and interview methods. In fact, researchers themselves become a research instrument in observation as they use all their senses to observe. They see, they hear, they touch, they feel. So they use all their sensory experiences to experience what's happening in the place where they are observing. And it obviously in a natural setting, so it's more effective. Of course, one can also observe in a controlled environment. That's a different story. It is important to know what to observe before the observation starts to be more effectively observing. Moreover, much could be observed that are not planned. You should plan before observation, but you could also spontaneously observe surprises that you never planned. Sometimes things that are not directly important to the study's focus. You could observe all and record everything, which could later be edited, used, or dropped in a meaningful manner. Observation obviously provide first-hand primary experience. So it's the observer himself or herself experience the person, the behavior, the phenomenon, the event in the first instance. So it's not something that is recreated. They see it, they observe it. But we need to understand the distinction, the advantage and disadvantage of observing in a natural setting or observing in a controlled environment. Both have different outcomes, obviously. If controlled environment, in a typical controlled environment, all subjects, they will adjust to the conditions provided. So it's not natural experience. It's edited or modified or conditioned. So the outcome is also conditioned. A researcher once wanted to experiment this using a frog to know the temperature that favors frogs. He took a frog and dropped it in a bowl full of regular water with room temperature. And the frog was happy swimming because it's a regular water. Then he took the frog and dropped it in a hot water. Although it's not very hot, the frog jumped out immediately as it was not pleasant. Now the researcher dropped the frog again back into the regular water. The frog is again happy swimming. But this time, he had a different plan. He had a hot plate under the bowl and started heating the water in the bowl slowly. The frog is slowly realizing there is something happening in the water, that it could sense the heat, but then it slowly adjusts to the temperature that is rising. It's not jumping immediately as in the previous instance. So the frog resist until a particular point when the heat is extreme, the frog jumps out of the bowl. So the moral of the experiment, or the moral of the story, is that the subjects will always tend to adjust to the conditions set by the researchers. And that is the disadvantage of conditional environment in which we observe. Whereas the naturalistic observation is going to yield you much natural outcomes and much first-hand instance experiences and so on. Biomimicry is one of the interesting phenomenon or a thing that is strongly being influenced by observation. There are a lot of scientists who are using biomimicry to advance their innovation. For those who are not familiar with biomimicry, biomimicry is simply, it means copying nature and the behavior in nature. So by observing what's happening in nature, how plants and animals and natural phenomena behave, people use those experiences to create their own products and innovations. So biomimicry is an important and very powerful example of observation technique, how observation can be useful in our daily life or in our scientific for our scientific advancement. So scientists, by observing nature, replicate the behavior of nature in designing, producing materials, structures, and systems that are modeled on biological entitles and processes. For instance, we designed flights by seeing birds flying. We designed boats by seeing fish swimming in water. So it's by observing, imitating, and recreating what's happening in the nature. That's what biomimicry is. And observation is obviously the tool to transfer biomimicry experience into the innovative actions. For instance, recently Mercedes-Benz made bionic cars that produces less emissions by observing boxfish and their behavior. Scientists recently observed the desert beetle in Namibia to develop water harvesting technique from fog, especially in mountainous region where there are a lot of fog but no water source. So they use a special a net to capture the fog, and then the water is collected for use. So the Namibian desert beetle has hydrophilic bumps at its back, and in Namibian desert there are only 2 centimeter rainfall annually. So whenever there is rainfall, it's very small drizzles. So the beetle stands in a particular declined position, and it starts collecting the little droplets, and then all of them is gathered and then becomes a water droplet, and the beetle drinks. So that's an interesting observation that scientists made, and they created this water harvesting technique from fog. The same technique is used for the self-filling water bottles that are used by cyclists. So biomimicry is a very, very powerful tool for observation, or observation is used in biomimicry. One of the typical example in biomimicry is the bullet trains, right? The bullet trains were redesigned in the late 90s in Japan. It's called bullet trains because the front shape of the train is similar to the shape of a bullet. The typical bullet train, the bullet shape of the bullet train was causing a loud boom noise when the train exited tunnels. Engineer and bird watcher E.G. Nakatsu observed a kingfisher diving into water, creating hardly any splash or noise, came with the idea to design a new model of the bullet train front shape based on his observation. There are so many other examples that are out there as a result of biomimicry, and observation is key for biomimicry. So I'm just highlighting to showcase the power of observation in scientific research that one can use. The big question: when to use observation? So we use observation when we are trying to understand an ongoing process or a situation, like you want to watch a sports event or a performance, when we are gathering data on individual behaviors or interactions, when two people are talking in a conversation, you observe them, or students' informal conversation in a classroom. When we need to know about a physical setting, and when data collection from individual is not a realistic option. Like for instance, you don't have the luxury of getting an appointment with a celebrity, but you can see them in screen, in stage, so you observe them and then you generate your data out of that. So these are some of the very technically important time that we use observation. Obviously, there are different types of observation, such as participant and non-participant observation, direct and indirect observation, controlled and real naturalistic observation, general and scientific observation. For instance, as a participant observer, the observer makes more interactions, while as a non with the people he's observing, while as a non-participant observer, the researcher makes limited observation or limited interactions with the people that he's observing. The answers to the two below questions in the slide you see, such as, are participants aware of the research study, and does the researcher participate in member activities and experiences? These two questions will reveal if you are a complete observer or a complete participant, or an observer as participant, or participant as observer. These are the four possible roles a researcher can take in observing a process or a phenomenon or a behavior of someone. And obviously, the observer could either be a complete member in observing, or an active member, or a peripheral member, based on the level of interactions that they are making in the event or in the phenomenon that they are observing. Each of these roles bring different outcomes. All of these roles must be clearly planned and explicitly informed to everyone, so that it's meeting ethical compliances. Like any other research methods, observation also has its own strengths and limitations. In terms of its strengths, observation is the best method to study natural behavior. It provides rich description, narrative information. It allows the researcher to experience the context and the meaning of it. While in terms of the limitations, reliability is a big problem in observation technique, as two researchers don't observe the same. So it's highly subjective in nature, because what I observe is what appeals to my eyes, compared to what someone observes. It's more into his taste. And obviously, other limitations are like writing objectively is quite challenging when researcher particularly immersed in a particular context or with a process, so they can get stuck with that with a context, and that could influence them to write in a way that they experienced it. It is also a time-consuming method, as you would observe once or multiple times. It depends on the needs, and there are ethical dilemmas and challenges in observing everything, due to privacy issues, or due to the sensitivity of the nature of the behavior or the phenomenon that you would like to observe. So we need to be aware of these strengths and limitations of this technique. And obviously, as I said at the beginning, observation is a very powerful tool or a technique to study and research teaching and learning. As this conference is focusing on teaching and learning, this method might be beneficial to people who are researching, studying, teaching, and learning. It is predominantly, even in teacher training programs or teacher professional practices, it's largely used. Observation is largely used in micro teaching, in practice teaching, in demo teaching. People actually videotape themselves to see what they are good at it, what they still need to improve. So that's what a lot of people use and benefit observation as a technique to improve their teaching skills and qualities. Wilfred Carr, his notion called the Craftsman's approach is very interesting to highlight here. Before the formal teacher training programs evolved in England, one of the common practices was, according to Wilfred Carr, is to ask the aspiring young teachers to sit and observe the classes of the senior teachers. So they come sit like other students. They quietly sit at the back and see what the teacher is doing. So they observe everything what the seniors are doing and learn the skill to do it themselves later. And this is more similar to the craftsman's approach that Wilfred Carr explains, that an apprentice young artist, or a young carpenter, or a young designer um, sits quietly and observes and watches the master doing the art. By watching and imitating the master doing the art, the apprentice picks up the skill and learns to do what the master did. So this is the craftsman's approach. So this is how a lot of people in the past learned the art of teaching. So teaching can use observation as a very powerful tool. Observation is also widely used to study students and teachers' classroom practices and behaviors. Observation also helps to explore a range of best practices in teaching and learning. It helps us to understand the pedagogic nature of different subjects and different learners, how different learners learn, how different subjects could be taught. So these are possible only when you observe them. Observation in modern teaching learning practices is widely used for professional development of teachers and to create professional learning community. So observation as a technique is very beneficial in teaching and learning practices. Here are some of the tips for good observation. We need to determine, first of all, we need to determine the focus of the observation based on the purpose and research questions of the research that we conduct. We need to design a clear plan for data collection with a recording sheets, checklist that are standardized, using observation guides with a list of interactions, processes, and behaviors to be observed, and field notes. These are very important. Field notes to record all that are observed using strategic approaches one can use to observe everything. We need to also plan who to observe, what to observe, when to observe, why to observe, where to observe, and how to observe. We have to select sites and samples that are adequate, relevant, representative to the study, representative to the target population and to the scope of the study. And obviously the sites and samples are picked purposefully, not randomly. Some actually also select conveniently, but purposeful sampling selection is more effective in qualitative research. We need to plan if one or multiple observers are going to observe the same or multiple phenomenon. Plan if you will use volunteers or paid researchers. If paid researchers are used, required professional and ethical compliance and terms must be discussed and agreed. Plan if you're going to record using audio or video devices and using field notes, and seek prior proper permission for whatever the approach you follow. Train the observers to meet the requirements of the research so they know what is to be observed. It is also important to time your observation appropriately. For instance, events and processes can only be observed when they are happening, right? So it can only be observed in a fixed time, while interactions and behaviors can be observed in either fixed or flexible time. It is also important to note that one must observe all the required ethical standards in order to conduct observation as a research. Great. The other important thing that I want to highlight before I close my keynote is the uh, tips on analyzing and reporting the observation data. So you 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 have conducted the observation, you have gone to the field, you observed people or event, whatever you chose to observe, and now you have observed and you have either recorded it in the field notes or in the audio or in the video device. So you need to now analyze that and then report it. So how do we do that? So here are some of these tips. It is important to record all that are observed into a manageable field notes. So you take all your notes while you're observing and transcribe the field notes into a transcript. If you audio taped, listen to it, or video taped, see it and transcribe it into a transcript like a text, which becomes your raw data. This should occur right after the observation when the memory is still fresh, so you don't miss anything that are to be recorded in your study. Include as many details as possible in the field notes while observing, as this may provide rich description to the phenomenon that are observed. It is also important to include the date, the time, the place, and the type of the data collection, the events in the field notes, which will help you to track the data for reporting later. It is recommended to leave space on the sides of the field notes to write your comments, which will help you to expand the notes to offer rich description of the problem that are explored. The observer must take notes strategically using shorthand, which will help you to cover range of observation in quick time. Remember, you have double task. You observe and take notes. So you have to do it very fast, the two, and you also don't miss the essential thing to be observed. So you need to be a skilled researcher to do observation. You need to highlight aspects in the field notes that are to be followed later or observed in using other techniques or methods. That's very important to keep a hint for you for a later research development. And if multiple observers observe the same phenomenon, the outcomes are different. So if multiple observers observe the same phenomenon, or one observer observed the same phenomenon multiple times, or one observer observed different phenomena at the same time, write separate field notes and then combine them as joint field notes later. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Review the expanded notes and add extra comments to enrich your transcript. Use standard qualitative data analysis techniques such as using data reduction, data display, data drawing, and data verifying steps, and to use thematizing using codes, categories, descriptions and themes to formalize the analysis in a more scientific manner. Ensure reliability, validity, trustworthiness, and authenticity using piloting, data and researcher triangulation, and field note triangulation if you're doing multiple observation. And then try to do external audits by double checking with others to validate your data and analysis. Use researchers' informed reflection to interpret the results, and write and rewrite the report to your targeted audience. If needed, publish to disseminate to the wider scientific community. So that's what I wanted to highlight in the last 15 minutes. I hope so. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity again. Thank you all for listening to me. I hope you found this interesting. Looking forward to your questions and discussions. Thank you.